Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to another episode of Through My Eyes with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. It's our first episode for the year 2021, and would like to take the opportunity to wish you a happy new year. Thank you for joining us. And for those who had been waiting for the program to go live, thank you for being there, being with us again this year as you were last year. We appreciate your time. Prof, do you have any opening words for our guests?
Well, just to join you in keeping faith with us and joining us for this our first outing this year. It's not too late to say Happy New Year to them, and that well, the first week of January has been full of, you won't say exciting or mind-blowing, mind-boggling events that I don't know whether to say we hope the rest of the year will just be as mind-boggling or that the rest of the year will not be as mind-boggling. But whatever it is, we are ready for it.
Yes, yes. And before we go on, Prof, I want to do something I didn't tell you I was going to do, but it was your 79th birthday a few days ago. Happy birthday, Prof. Some people have sent messages to say, how does the Prof do it at 79? And maybe we should start the program this evening with an answer to that question, Prof. How do you do it at 79? This is session 30.
Well, I owe it to you, the moderator. I owe it to our comrades on this program because I think I find the session so intellectually stimulating. And that stimulation is not just mental, it seems to affect my total outcome. I feel so alive uh, when I prepare for this program. So it is it is the honor done me by instituting this program. When you approached me, you know fully well that I was very, very reluctant. I just felt every week, and I thought, oh well, maybe after about 5 weeks, 10 weeks, you will get fed up. But you didn't get fed up. And the reaction from our viewers on this platform have been so encouraging and so stimulating that I have felt very alive and young. So there we are.
Thank you very much for that, Prof. Well, today wouldn't be any different. We've got loads of questions for you to ask, and to our viewers, please feel free as we start to go through the questions for Prof today. If you've got any questions, feel free to put that on. We're live on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and we'll get all the questions across all those channels. Prof, we witnessed unprecedented scenes, I would say earlier today, as the rioters overran the US Capitol building, in what has drawn condemnation from many world leaders as well. Um, I know you were up till about 5 a.m. watching the proceedings and how things were going on. But, Prof, what was going through your mind as you saw these rioters breach the Capitol building?
In my wildest imagination, I didn't think I would ever, ever witness such an event. Well, as you quite rightly pointed out at the beginning of this program, I'm 79 years old now, and I did live a considerable number of years in the United States. I lived through the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, the Martin Luther King Jr., the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., several civil rights leaders. I lived through the Vietnam War, the demonstrations, took over university campuses, streets, and not once, not once was Congress attacked and breached. Not once. And not once did a sitting American president set a mob, thugs, murderers, because 4 people are dead from what happened in Congress, um, either yesterday or early this morning, depending on where you are. Not once did an American president set a mob to seek to carry out an insurrection, a coup, or whatever name you may want to, a takeover of government, or whatever term you may wish to use. I sat there and saw the flag of the secessionists in the American South during the Civil War being paraded through the corridors and the rotunda of the American Congress. Even the Southern forces never invaded Washington. The closest they got was, I think, Fort Stevens, that was on the outskirts of Washington, D.C. And here now was this flag being paraded, this treasonous flag being paraded. I felt that Trump had brought the United States to the lowest nadir of existence. He promised to make America great again. Well, the America we saw on global television yesterday was not a great America. It reminded me of, in fact, as I watched that scene, my mind flashed back to the invasion of the Spanish Parliament by the Spanish army shortly after democracy was restored in Spain, and it took the personal intervention of the King of Spain to send that army back to the barracks. Except in this case, it was the main president, the chief executive of the United States, that was in this mob, unelected representatives of the people. It was not an empty Capitol. They were not on holidays. They hadn't closed for the day and gone home. They were in session. And his own vice president the number two man in his government, was there in the chambers. So in a way, he wanted to decapitate the American government because Vice President was number two, Madam Speaker was number three in the hierarchy of American leadership. So that would have left Trump alone to rule America. It was treason. It was treason he committed. Criminally, he incited that crowd, that unthinking mob. And it's not just a crime on his part, it's also a sin on his part because he played with the minds of simple human beings who probably these are just, poor, unemployed people, poor, cotton picking farmers, poor, but this was not the elite who could reason things for themselves. He played on their minds like Emperor Nero fiddling while Rome was burning. These are the things that flashed through my mind. And one more thing, I then asked myself, where are the American troops? Where is the SWAT team? Where is, 82nd Division, paratroopers? These were things with special forces. Where were they? Where were even the ordinary policemen? A lot, and give this to the Americans, a lot of commentators have compared the way and manner the American police dealt with the Black Lives Matter demonstrators and compared that with the jail. One of them put it that the American police has just shown that it is part of the white terrorist domestic movement in the United States, showing empathy for these white domestic terrorists, while they would have been prepared to mow down the Black Lives Matter or civil rights demonstrators or any demonstrators, not necessarily black, but any demonstrators fighting for civil rights and human rights in the United States. They would deal with them. They were just people who were there to keep white terrorist establishment in power. And that's what happened. I felt bad, very, very bad, very disturbed indeed.
Prof, let me push that last point you raised there because that has raised quite a bit of concern from many quarters. I think it was about 2 sessions ago. We talked about the cyber attack that was happening in a number of US government organizations and the fact that that attack may have been going on. Some even said that the president had taken his eye off national security issues and had left so many gaps. Did what happened yesterday show us that indeed there is probably a lot of cause for concern? Or is this just because it was Trump?
No, I mean, there is an African proverb that says fish rots from the head. So Trump has his own large share of the blame. But Trump is not the chief of police of Capitol Hill. He's not the chief of Capitol Police Department. He's not. Trump is not the Speaker of the House. Trump is not whatever committee of Congress that oversees the Capitol Police. So this thing is more endemic than what we're talking about. It's more endemic. I mean, when people say that racism is endemic in Western societies, often you feel people are crying wolf. It takes an episode like this for you to say, "Oh, excuse me, is this how Congress is guarded? Excuse me." I mean, where are these policemen who normally would dress up like Rambo and and terrorize anyone who is brown, who looks, out of order and everything? And you get this ragtag mob, all because they are white, come calling. And these same policemen are nowhere to be found. Then you start to understand why people say racism is endemic within the system. So there are lots of people who bear responsibility for what has happened in the United States yesterday. Don't forget that even after this disgraceful and shameful episode, the people, congressmen and senators who were filing appeals against ratification of Biden still filed those appeals and still went through the system. I think it was around 9:30 this morning before finally we could get Biden's election ratified. I would have thought after what happened, after the invasion and desecration of Congress, that when they reconvened, people would have been saying, point of order, I withdraw my objection. Point of order, Madam Speaker, I withdraw my objection. No. And you will notice they were all white. The people who raised these objections. I concede, because don't misunderstand me. I mean, after all, out of 50 white Republicans, only 7, I'm talking about senators now, only 7, I would still say, still joined the rebellion within the halls of Congress. So it's not as if all Republicans joined, but I would say it's a story in itself that all the 7 senators who joined in challenging the victory of Biden were Republicans and were white.
Prof, let me ask a question here because some have raised this point around the fact that the US was always some sort of standard when it comes to democracy. How do they now recover from what has happened to them? And if we don't look to the US as that sort of standard, who do we look to? when it comes to the standard in democracy?
I believe we were fooled. The United States really was never the shining city on the hill that it purported to be. We didn't know any better because this was a period before social media. So it was whatever the American press told us, whatever the American embassy told us, that we accepted. When there was that document that said, all men were created equal, this we believe in. We accepted that as the reality in the United States. And yet, as that document was being adopted, there was slavery in the United States. Women were not allowed to vote. The Native Americans were not allowed to vote. They had been almost exterminated. Even the non-property white people were not allowed to vote. So all these groups had their humanity denied by the same country that was selling to us this Declaration of Independence as if that was the reality. That was never the reality. And when people were there being allowed to vote, it was gradually. And it was 1964 that the voting rights guaranteeing the right to vote for blacks, 1964, I was in the US then, was finally signed by President Lyndon Johnson. So we were being sold dummies and we didn't know any better. But going back to the second part or the second leg of your question, the United States grant them this, concede this to them. They now themselves realize that democracy is still work in progress, and that probably every election they will commit themselves to making the United States that much more perfect, but never absolutely perfect, because there's going to be pushback. Believe me, there's going to be pushbacks. They are going to accuse the Biden administration of being too pro-black, too pro-Latina, too pro-Native Americans. The whites that you saw who invaded that the Congress yesterday were actually fighting a lost cause in order to preserve their to preserve what they regard as their their status. Their status. There will be that pushback from them. Therefore, that coalition which brought Barack Obama into power, that has now brought Biden and Kamala Harris into power, will have to be alert so that when the pushback comes, they also can push back and not buy into whatever program, because it is going to be decently wrapped and packaged. They must strip the package off to see what they are being sold, whether as laws in Congress or whatever have you. And the way we can be helpful, the rest of the world, I mean, is to emphasize your last statement, not that America is the shining city on the hill, but that America is meant to be the shining city on the hill, and that we want them to be that shining city on the hill.
Prof, there's a question here from YouTube that I want to put to you because I think that it actually captures the essence of some of the conversations that we've had in the past. And what this person is saying here is that we had the Me Too movement. We thought that that was going to bring some kind of justice, particularly to the blacks, and address the roots of injustice in society. We had Black Lives Matter. That again went on. It kind of started to fade away gradually from the peak of what we had earlier on last year. And now we've had this situation that has presented itself. Do you think that this is that one situation that could really bring justice back, particularly for the black race?
I am an optimistic person. I will want that questionnaire to also remember that Biden and Kamala Harris got 78 million votes, the highest that any American presidential candidate ever had in any election. They should recall that just was it yesterday or a day before, Atlanta, Georgia, that never had Democratic senators before, elected two Democratic senators, one being black, very important, and one being Jewish, very important. If you study the history of the American South, these two groups, the African American community and the Jewish American or American Jewish community, were usually the two most persecuted communities in the South in the United States. And yet, as of today, the two senators representing Georgia, one is African American and the other is American Jewish. Massive victory, part of the consequences of the Me Too movement, American Lives Matter, etc., etc. And even go back to the civil rights movement and rallies by Martin Luther King Jr. and the anti-slavery movement in the US. Human progress never lasts if it comes by revolution. But when it comes a step at a time, that progress tends to last and is then incremental in the sense that you build upon it. So to that extent, I think progress has been made, and I think progress will continue to be made. There may be setbacks, because again, that is part of human history. At times, 4 steps forward, 2 steps back, but that the human spirit again arouses itself, fights back, and takes again more steps in the future ahead.
Prof, Prof, you talked about Georgia there, and there's some history in the fact that the two Democrats that have been appointed, one of them a black man, first time in 20 plus years that a black man will be a senator from Georgia. However, Stacey Abrams has been credited by many as the person that has driven the grassroots efforts that has yielded the results that we have seen. What can we take away in terms of lessons from what happened in Georgia?
I'm glad you brought up that issue. Stacey Abrams ran for the governorship post at the not this last election, but the one before now. And she actually won. She actually won. The Republicans stole that election from her. She then took a decision. Rather than sulking in her sitting room or weeping over spilt milk, she decided that the only way to prevent elections being stolen in Georgia, as well as in other parts of the United States, but she was concentrating on Georgia, was to go for voter registration. Voter registration. It's easy to suppress 1,000 votes. It's easy to suppress 2,000 votes, but it is not easy to suppress 17,000 votes margin of victory. So she got a lot of the Black community, especially the rural community, who tend to be frightened by the police into not voting. She got them registered. She enlisted the help of a lot of civil rights activists who joined her into knocking on doors, into preaching. It was hard work, but it paid. So, to me, the takeaway from what happened in Georgia, which should be copied by Tennessee, by Alabama, by Mississippi, is start preparing for the next election now. Go in for voter registration, get preachers in the church every Sunday to preach about the sanctity of the ballot box and how this is actually the key to final emancipation. And always make reference to George.
Prof, can you hear me?
Just now.
Ah, okay. That was a technical glitch there. Prof, let's move over to the United Kingdom. Now, the UK has numerous multilateral, bilateral arrangements when it comes to extradition agreements with different countries. Now, the US UK arrangement was put to to the test in a way this week when a court refused to grant the request of the United States. And some have said that this is a big issue when it comes to the entire principle of freedom of speech and the rights of journalists to bear their minds. Does this situation create a diplomatic challenge for the UK government? And secondly, when do such information leaks cross the line between journalism and national security?
Well, I think most countries in the world have enormous respect for the freedom and integrity of the British judicial system. This WikiLeaks issue is not an easy one, actually, on a balance of probabilities. Given my own background in diplomacy, I understand and accept the fact that diplomacy cannot function without secrecy of community, secrecy of negotiations, secrecy of undertakings. And on the other hand, I accept that democracy also works on openness of policies. And some have argued, that's a school of thought, that in fact, peace is more guaranteed and more secured when negotiations between governments and among governments are subjected to the sunshine of openness. A balance must be struck. I believe that WikiLeaks overstepped the bounds of that balance when it decided to leak secret cables between embassies and their home governments, transmitting all kinds of information. Diplomacy cannot work under that kind of openness. But I also accept that secret agreements secretly entered into may be inimical to peace. So I can see the difficulty of the judge handling this case. I think that the United States had a difficult case to argue. And as the judiciary often does, when it is confronted with a difficult case, they will look for a very narrow ground to base their judgment upon, rather than the grand principle of either the right of journalism to function versus the right of diplomats and government agencies to function effectively. So I think this matter will continue to be resolved on a case-by-case basis. I don't think we will ever find the right balance, but I think WikiLeaks overstepped the bounds. But then maybe this is diplomacy was my field, and therefore I would tend to lean towards the sanctity of secrecy in diplomatic engagements.
Thank you for that, Prof. Let's go to Iran. Um, Iran has announced that they are going to be, they have restarted their uranium enrichment program to move it from 4%, I think, to 20%. Um, Now, as expected, Israeli Prime Minister has said Israel will not allow Iran to manufacture nuclear weapons. The US has also called this a campaign of nuclear extortion. But Prof, I know you are an advocate of Nigeria developing some capability when it comes to this kind of area. Where do you draw the line between a country deciding what they want to do that is in their national interest versus international meddling?
Well, between Iran and Israel, may God save the rest of us. I, I think that the problem Iran has cannot really be defined in the absolute sense of the right to the world. Pakistan, India, Israel itself, China, the United States, France, Great Britain. I mean, I could go on. I mean, there are those who openly declare that they have it, and those who we know have it, neither deny nor accept that they have it, and so on and so forth. I don't know why Iran just doesn't keep its mouth shut and get on with whatever it wants to do. Because each time it openly talks about its achievement, is like rubbing the face of Israel, tweaking the nose of Israel, in an attempt to provoke Israel into doing something. You see, again, in diplomacy, there are times governments are prepared to look the other way, provided you are not shouting at the rooftop about what you are doing. You know, the winks and the nods, well, we are doing this, but we're not going to talk about it. And this will be our objective, but we are not going to proclaim it. And then God said, all right, as long as you don't shout at the rooftop, we will pretend we don't know what is going on. There are a lot of diplomatic situations which are maintained and sustained that way. But as I said, between Iran and Israel, may God protect, the whole world. Um, I have no objection, principally, to any country that wants to develop a nuclear capability. Because to me, it is sheer racism to say that some countries are entitled to have nuclear capability. They are more sensible. They can be trusted to maintain that nuclear capability. But others cannot be trusted with developing nuclear capability. And therefore, they should trust others, especially when there is no correlation between good behavior and being a nuclear power. Nuclear powers, in fact, tend to be bullies because they know they have that capability that allows them to clobber you on the head if you step out of line. They haven't shown themselves that they have a moral capability or that the moral index in their diplomatic behavior is one that is so apparent. So I don't buy into this monopoly of nuclear weapons by a particular civilization or a particular race.
Prof.
Having said that, I think it is incumbent on nations not to make themselves nuisances in the international community. I think nations should be cooperative in making the world a safer place for all of us. Not a question of making America great, but making America good again. Not a question of making Nigeria great again, but making Nigeria a good nation internationally. Not a question of making China great again, but making China a good cooperative nation internationally. I know that's a tall order for any nation run by men. Men and women are not noted for being good. They are noted, if anything else, for being, well, let me watch my language. These days that people are banned on and Facebook and what have you. Let me moderate my language.
Let me save you from that, Prof. There's a point here. There's a point here on YouTube that says nuclear weapons has never been in the interest of Iran, but a vindictive and irresponsible use of weapons when it said a country like Israel should not exist.
You want me to repeat what I said earlier on, that between Iran and Israel, may God save all of us. People don't seem to realize that deep and embedded in the psyche of the Iranians is the fact that the British Secret Service and the American Secret Service jointly overthrew their government. I believe it was in the 1950s or so, and brought the Shah into power. They believe, the Iranians believe that their country had been hard done um, by the international community, and that it was the Islamic Revolution that, in fact, now led to the renaissance of Iran, or Persia, as it was, as it was then. Um, and people should not forget that Persia, which we now call Iran, they have a civilization that as old as the Greek civilization. So you're not talking about some run-of-the-mill civilization or nation. Having said that, I don't think, and I've said it on this program, I don't believe that the Iranians are stupid enough to want to obliterate or destroy Israel. I mean, they will be committing suicide if they tried it. They may verbalize it, maybe part of the propaganda war between Iran and Israel. But the Iranians are not going to try anything that stupid. Even if they can overrun Israel, which they cannot, the United States will not allow any country to overrun Israel. That's a simple fact of Middle East diplomacy. It is in the interest of Israel to proclaim from the rooftop that Iran wants to destroy Israel. Yes, that Iran wants to destroy Israel. Israel knows that Iran cannot do so without being obliterated itself. But it plays into Israeli with the United States, with Western Europe, to keep harping on what Iran will do or will not do to Israel. And in any case, of what benefit has it been to the Palestinians after they recognize the right of Israel to exist? Is their position any better today than it was before they recognized the right of Israel to exist? On the contrary, the position of the Palestinians is worse today than before they extended recognition to Israel. So it's a propaganda game that both Israel and Iran are playing. They are nipping at each other's heel, but it's not going. They are irritants to each other, and it's not going to be more than that. It's not.
Prof, we have
I
some
mean,
questions.
yeah, India and Pakistan used to go to war with each other, and people used to say, if they became nuclear countries, nuclear powers, this is going to be Armageddon. Well, since they became nuclear powers, have they gone to war? No, they haven't. You see, being a nuclear power imposes its own sanity upon, the leadership of each country involved.
Prof, we have about 3 minutes to go. There are a few
Oh,
questions on YouTube here that I don't think we'll be able to do much justice to, because it talks about Nigeria's foreign policy, which I think you have shared in the past that that's not, you don't particularly like to talk about your successors, give them the opportunity to do what they're doing in their role. However, there is a point I want to put to you in the last 2 minutes that we have. We are seeing an increase in the number of COVID-19 vaccines that are being released. We are also seeing an increase in the number of cases and deaths, primarily due to the UK strain and the South African strain of the virus. What message do you want to put out there, Prof, regarding COVID-19 and what's going on? We've got 2 minutes, sir.
Well, what message can I put out except behave responsibly, avoid going into a crowd situation, wear your mask, wash your hands, just behave responsibly, or else you will pay a heavy price personally for that. I mean, this COVID-19, everybody there is vicious. It kills. This variation is even worse than the first one. And in Nigeria, in South, in a lot of third world countries, it is killing at a much, much higher rate during the first wave. So please, behave responsibly. I mean, I have lost about 5 Nigerian professors who are colleagues in the past 2 weeks to COVID-19 complications. It's not funny. It's sad. On an individual basis, on a personal basis, or in terms of of the country nationally and internationally. So be sensible, be responsible.
Prof, thank you for that. Thank you to our viewers that have joined across all the channels. For those questions that I couldn't answer, apologies on those ones. Some of them, we'll look at them, and if we can represent them next week, we will do that to Prof next week. But thank you so much for joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you again next week, Thursday, same time, 7 p.m. UK time, 8 p.m. Nigeria time. Prof, any last words before we go?
A pleasure to be back on the platform. I look forward to meeting with you again next week. I hope we will have interesting issues to discuss. And until then, shalom.
Thank you, Prof. Bye to our viewers as well. See you next week.